I walked out of work expecting silence and routine, but my parking spot was empty. No mistake, no tow notice, just cold air and a hollow space where my car should have been. My chest tightened as I checked again, slower this time. Gone. The car I'd finally paid off, my first real win. I called my parents, panic spilling over my words. My mom laughed softly and said they'd given it to my sister because she needed it more. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I hung up and called 911. I didn't grow up dreaming about cars. I grew up dreaming about quiet, the kind that comes when no one needs anything from you. No emergencies, no last-minute rescues, just space to breathe. I'm in my 30s now, working as a software engineer in Denver. My life looks stable from the outside. Steady job, my own apartment, bills paid on time. The kind of life my parents like to point at and say, "See, she's fine." And that word fine has followed me my entire life. In my family, fine meant invisible. I was the reliable one, the kid who didn't make noise. I learned early that if I handled things myself, no one would hover, question, or interfere. So I did. I worked through school. I budgeted carefully. I learned how to stretch a paycheck without telling anyone it was tight. Independence wasn't a personality trait for me. It was survival. My parents liked to say they treated their daughters equally, but equality in our house had an interesting definition. If my sister Ella struggled, it was a crisis. If I struggled, it was character building. Ella was the youngest, the fragile one, the one who needed more support. I was the one who would figure it out. That dynamic didn't explode overnight. It settled in slowly like dust. You stop noticing until it's everywhere. When I moved out, I didn't ask for help. Not because I didn't need it, but because I already knew the answer. I learned to measure my life in payments and bills, small numbers that added up to something solid. And when I finally bought my car, it wasn't flashy. It wasn't a symbol to impress anyone. It was proof. Proof that I could build something without borrowing from anyone's patience or generosity. I remember the day I finished the last payment. I sat in the driver's seat longer than necessary, hands on the wheel, letting the moment land. It felt quiet, earned, mine. My parents never said they were proud. They just asked practical questions. Why didn't you wait? Why didn't you let your dad help? What if something happens? I smiled and brushed it off. I'd gotten good at that. Ella, meanwhile, was still orbiting the family home. New plans every year, new setbacks, new explanations. Every time something went wrong, there was always a cushion waiting for her. I watched it happen from a distance, telling myself it wasn't my business anymore. I thought moving out meant moving on. Standing in that parking lot, staring at the empty space, I realized how wrong I was. Because even miles away, even fully grown, even financially independent, my role in the family hadn't changed at all. To them, what was mine was still negotiable. And that realization was more unsettling than the missing car itself. I stayed in my carless silence for a long minute after my mom spoke, phone still pressed to my ear. I could hear her breathing on the other end, calm and unbothered, like she'd just told me she moved a lamp, not handed over something I'd worked years to earn. She said it like a fact, like a decision that didn't require discussion. They gave my car to Ella, because she needed it more. I asked one question, just one. Where is she? My mom sighed the way she always did when I asked something inconvenient. She said Ella was driving around the city trying to clear her head after a rough week. As if my car were therapy, as if my effort were a resource meant to be redistributed whenever someone else had a bad day. That's when the heat crept up my neck. Slow, quiet, dangerous. Ella had totaled 3 cars in 5 years. Not rumors, not exaggeration. I remembered each one clearly. One was blamed on bad weather, one on a distracted driver, one on bad luck. Every story ended the same way. New keys, fresh start, no consequences. I remembered sitting at family dinners listening to my parents reassure her it wasn't her fault while I calculated my next payment in my head, wondering if I could afford groceries and gas in the same week. I reminded my mom of that. Carefully, calmly. She dismissed it just as carefully. She's been through a lot, she said. You're stronger. You'll manage. There it was, the sentence that had followed me my whole life. You're stronger. It always sounded like praise until I realized it was permission. Permission to take from me because I wouldn't fall apart publicly. Permission to treat my stability like excess. I asked if they planned to ask me first. My dad finally spoke up, his voice low practiced. He said they meant to tell me. He said it was temporary. He said family shares. He didn't say sorry. I looked around the parking lot again like my car might come back if I stared hard enough. I thought about the night I signed the final payment confirmation, about the quiet pride I didn't share with anyone because I'd learned not to make my success uncomfortable for others, about how I'd protected that car like a promise to myself, and suddenly everything snapped into focus. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an emergency. It wasn't even about Ella. It was about ownership, about control, about the unspoken rule that whatever I built could be taken the moment someone else wanted it more. I realized then that if I argued, they'd talk me down. If I cried, they'd call me dramatic. If I waited, they'd normalize it. The system was designed for my silence. My mom was still talking, explaining how upset Ella had been, how this would really help her get back on her feet. I stopped listening to the words and focused on the truth behind them. They weren't asking. They were informing me. And for the first time in my life, I understood something with absolute clarity. If I didn't draw a line now, there would never be one. I drove home on autopilot, though there was nothing to drive. The ride share dropped me off outside my apartment, and the quiet inside felt heavier than usual. No engine ticking as it cooled, no familiar click of keys hitting the counter, just silence, thick and unmoving. I sat on the edge of my couch and stared at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected shaking tears, something dramatic. Instead, there was a hollow calm, the kind that settles in after something breaks clean through. I replayed the call in my head. Not the words exactly, but the tone. Casual, decided. As if my role in the situation had already been accounted for and dismissed. They hadn't stolen from me in their minds. They'd reassigned what they believed already belonged to them. I opened my laptop and pulled up my records without really thinking about it. Payments, bills, the confirmation from the final balance clearing. My name on every line. No shared ownership, no co-signers, no gray areas. I scrolled slowly, absorbing the evidence not just of legality, but of effort. Late nights, missed trips, careful choices no one had ever clapped for. That's when the weight hit me. This wasn't the first time something of mine had quietly disappeared for Ella's sake. It was just the first time it was big enough, undeniable enough that even I couldn't minimize it. In the past, it had been smaller things. Time. Money I was temporarily lending. Furniture left behind during a move. Each time I'd told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But this time felt different. This time it felt final. I realized something uncomfortable then. If I let this go, it wouldn't end here. The next time Ella needed help, the answer would come from my life again. My savings, my space, my stability. Because I was fine. Because I could handle it. Because I always did. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. A message from my mom. Another from an aunt. I didn't open them. I already knew what they'd say. Don't overreact. Be understanding. Family first. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, my car was being driven by someone who had never earned it, never protected it, never worried about losing it. And everyone expected me to be okay with that. Something inside me hardened not into anger, but resolve. I picked up my phone, opened the dial pad, and stared at the numbers for a long moment. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about drawing a line where one had never existed before. I pressed the call button, and for the first time, I chose myself. The dispatcher's voice was calm, neutral, almost soothing in a way that made my situation feel suddenly very real. She asked me to describe the vehicle. I did. Color, year, where it was last seen. Then she asked the question that made my throat tighten. Do you know who may have taken it? I paused, just long enough to feel the weight of what I was about to say settle in my chest. Yes, I said. My parents gave it to my sister without my permission. There was no gasp on the other end, no judgment, just a brief pause, then typing. Is the vehicle registered solely under your name? Yes. Do you have proof of ownership? Yes. Did you authorize anyone else to use it? No. Each answer landed like a brick locking into place. An officer met me later that evening near my apartment. She was polite, direct, all business. She didn't ask about family dynamics or feelings. She asked for documentation. I showed her the payments, the bills, the confirmation that everything was paid in full. My name alone on every line. She nodded once and said something I hadn't realized I needed to hear. This is not a family misunderstanding. This is a report of unauthorized use. Hearing it framed that way was oddly grounding, like someone had finally translated years of blurred emotional boundaries into plain language. Within hours, the calls started. My mom first, then my dad, then relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't answer. My phone buzzed nonstop, lighting up the table like it was possessed. I let it happen. For once, I didn't rush to manage their discomfort. The next morning, I got the call that shifted everything. They'd located the car. Ella had been stopped during a routine traffic check. When the officer ran the plates, my report came up immediately. The car was flagged. She was asked to step out. She didn't understand what was happening. She kept saying there had been a mistake, that our parents said it was fine. It wasn't fine. The car was taken in as part of the investigation. Ella was questioned. No drama, no handcuffs, just consequences unfolding quietly the way they tend to when no one is yelling. My parents showed up at the station furious. They demanded to speak to someone higher up. They insisted this was private, that families shouldn't involve law enforcement, that I was taking things too far. The response was simple. Once a report is filed, it's not a family decision anymore. That line hit them hard. They called me again after that. This time, my dad left a voicemail. His voice was strained, controlled in that way he used when he thought reason would fix everything. He said Ella was scared. He said this could follow her. He said I was being inflexible. He said I was tearing the family apart over a car. I listened to the message once, then I deleted it. A few weeks later, we were all in the same building again, not around a dinner table, not in a living room, in a courtroom. I sat in the second row, hands folded in my lap. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't angry. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching something that had been inevitable for a long time finally play out. Ella sat between our parents. She looked smaller than I remembered, less certain. The confidence she'd always worn like armor was gone. Her foot tapped nervously against the floor. She avoided my eyes. The judge was brisk, professional. She laid out the facts as they were. Vehicle ownership, unauthorized use, statements given, documentation provided. When Ella was asked to speak, her voice wavered. She admitted she'd taken the car knowing it wasn't hers. She admitted she hadn't asked me. She said she assumed I'd understand, that I'd forgive her, that I always did. That was the moment something inside me finally settled. Not because she apologized, but because she said it out loud. She assumed I would absorb the cost. The judge didn't lecture. She didn't moralize. She issued consequences, probation, loss of driving privileges for a period of time, restitution to cover the fees incurred, clear terms, clear boundaries. My mom cried quietly beside Ella. My dad stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Neither of them looked at me. When it was over, they filed out together. They didn't stop. They didn't ask how I was. They didn't say anything at all. I walked out alone. That afternoon, I went to retrieve my car. It was parked under harsh fluorescent lights, looking smaller somehow. Still intact. Still unifying. When I opened the door, I saw the signs immediately. Cups in the cup holder, receipts stuffed into the console. The seat adjusted differently than I remembered. Not damaged, just used, carelessly. I stood there longer than necessary, taking it in. This was what entitlement looked like. Not rage, not cruelty, just casual disregard. I cleaned it myself later that night, slowly, methodically, vacuuming crumbs, wiping down surfaces, restoring things to where they belonged. It felt symbolic, though I didn't let myself lean too far into that. A few days later, I got a message from my mom. She said she hoped I was happy. She said families shouldn't keep score. She said forgiveness mattered more than rules. I read it once. I didn't respond. Because the truth was simple. Rules were the only thing that had protected me. Forgiveness had always been expected, never earned. For the first time in my life, the dynamic had shifted. Not because I yelled, not because I demanded, but because I refused to carry what wasn't mine to carry anymore. And that scared them, because without my silence, their system didn't work. Life didn't snap back into place after that. It settled differently. I drove my car again, but the feeling had changed. The steering wheel felt familiar, steady, like muscle memory returning. What didn't return was the noise, the constant checking in, the expectation that I'd smooth things over. The silence from my parents stretched on thin and deliberate. Ella stopped calling. I heard through relatives that she was laying low, that this had been hard on her. No one asked how it had been for me, and for once that didn't sting the way it used to. It clarified things. I started going to a small support group downtown, nothing dramatic. Just people learning how to say no without apologizing. I listened more than I talked at first. Then one night I told my story. When I finished, no one told me I was wrong. They nodded. They understood. At home, I cleaned out a drawer and found my spare key. I placed it somewhere new, somewhere only I knew. The car was back. My life was quieter. And for the first time, quiet felt like peace.
Watching Hannah's story unfold, it's clear this was never just about a car. It was about a woman who spent years being reliable, steady, and selfless until her family mistook those traits for permission. Hannah didn't lash out. She didn't humiliate anyone. She chose something far more difficult: accountability done calmly and within the law. What makes her story powerful isn't revenge, it's restraint. She proved that setting boundaries doesn't require cruelty and that justice doesn't have to be loud to be effective. By standing her ground, Hannah didn't break her family. She exposed a system that only worked when she stayed silent. And in doing so, she reclaimed something bigger than property: her sense of self-respect. There's a lesson here many of us recognize too late. Being the strong one can quietly become a burden others expect you to carry forever. Strength doesn't mean absorbing endless loss. Sometimes real strength is saying no and letting the consequences land where they belong. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in Hannah's place, would you have handled it the same way? Where do you draw the line between loyalty and self-protection? And have you ever been told to keep the peace at the cost of your own boundaries? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your experiences might help someone else feel less alone. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe to the channel for more real-life family dramas that explore justice, boundaries, and choosing yourself when it matters most.